I am recording. Good.
And could you just tell us who you are?
Ortbals.
And how many years were you president?
13 years.
Very good. Well, we'd like to talk first a little bit about how you came to live at the lake and how you first purchased property here.
Well, actually, I didn't purchase property. I was smart enough to marry into it. But it was funny, the first time I ever heard of Dunlap Lake. Now, you have to understand, I was born and raised in St. Louis. And I didn't move to the Illinois side until I was 34. And like everybody else on the Missouri side, Illinois was the dark side of the moon to me. And so when I moved over here, we were living in Granite City. So in 1995, we decided, that's my first wife and I, and we had 2 girls, we decided we wanted to move. Now, we didn't want to just move to any old subdivision with, a deck and a tree and a bush. We wanted something unusual in the lot, creek or a pond or forest or something like that. And so we were working with a real estate agent, and because she didn't have enough room in her car, we followed her around as we went from house to house. She showed us a house on Arlington, close to the golf course. There's a small lake there. And then she said, "Have you ever been to Dunlap Lake?" Never been to Dunlap Lake, never heard of Dunlap Lake. And so, okay, follow me. So we're following her this way and that, making one turn after another. We're lost. We have no idea where we are or where we're going. She ends up taking us to a house down here on Lotus, and we won't even get out of the car. Because both my wife and I were both from St. Louis, all our family was in St. Louis, a lot of friends in St. Louis, we played softball and volleyball in St. Louis, all this, so we wanted to be a whole lot closer to St. Louis than what we perceived we were on Lotus. And maybe if she'd have taken a different route, we'd have realized we weren't that far after all. But so we wouldn't even get out of the car. But that's the first time I ever heard of Dunlap Lake. And then who'd have thought, not that many years later, I ended up being president of the board. Strange things happen in life. But so we ended up splitting up, and Barbara and I met in 1998. And got married in 2003, and I went on the board in 2004.
Gutsy. As
Yeah.
a resident, yeah.
Well, back in those days, it was, you almost had to draft people in the service to get them to serve on the board. It was like, okay, who's going to do this? And that's about the way it was. I went to one of the annual meetings and, hey, I'll do it. Okay, and that's how it happened. And actually, the way I became president, I told you Marcia Weaver was president. When I first got on the board, Don Hamilton was president. He wanted to quit, turned it over to Marcia. Marcia was president for 1 year. She didn't like it. And so Barbara and I were both on the board at the time. We walked into the first meeting of the year, and Marcia says, "Hey, how about one of you 2 be president?" I said, "Okay." And so then I was president for 13 years.
Very good.
Yeah.
So you bought here mainly, so what period of time
Actually,
was it?
Barbara bought the house with her ex-husband in, 95? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
And she's not from around here. She grew up in Detroit, moved to St. Louis back in the 70s, and but she had a relationship with the guy that owned this house, Norman Johnson, who was a professor at SIU. And when she saw it was for sale, snatched it up very quickly.
That often happens here.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the first memories you had as a couple here at the lake when you bought this house?
Well, I think the first time I really experienced a lake was maybe the summer of '98. She invited me over for barbecue with a bunch of people, and you know, you look out the window here, and you're just astounded that something like this can be so close to the city of St. Louis. It's just rather amazing. But it's a whole different way of life over here on the Illinois side than it is on the Missouri side. That's one of the things that fascinated me when I first moved over here, is how different the development pattern was. And I tell people all the time, what you have on the Illinois side is small town America 30 minutes from the arch. You don't have that on the Missouri side. You drive down a Manchester or a Lindbergh or whatever over there, and you go from one community to the next, and you're never quite sure where you are because they all run together. Over here, they're all separate, very separate and distinct communities. Less so now than they were in the mid-'80s when I first came over here, but even still, you know, Edwardsville is very distinct from Alton, and very distinct from Collinsville and Belleville and so forth. They're all small towns out here, and they've got that small town atmosphere. So if you like that kind of thing, if you like living in a place where the Halloween parade is a big deal, this is where you should live.
And some of your neighbors, want to talk a little bit about some of the activities you've done with the neighbors since you lived on the lake?
Well, that's one of the fun things about living on the lake, is you're almost like on vacation all the time, because you just walk out your door and you go swimming or fishing or boating or kayaking or whatever, and it really becomes, the lake really becomes a socializing place where you get together and tie up with other folks out on the lake with their boats and so forth. And you've got that atmosphere out there that I don't know where else you could have that.
Very good. Talk a little bit about as you served as president. Sounds like you kind of got drafted into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm going to see. So what changes, what did you learn about leadership while you were president, as far unique to the Dunlap situation?
Yeah, well, when you've got a volunteer organization, when I first got on the board, it was very much a volunteer organization. Throughout the history of the association, I think the mantra was the cheapest way is the best way. And so everything was done by volunteers, and I mean everything. So all of the billing and collection of assessments and stuff was done by an individual. And so that's very problematic. But so one of the things that was important to do was to professionalize the whole thing.
And how'd you do that?
Well, a number of ways, really. And first of all, there are still people on the lake that believe that we should do everything with volunteers, or a whole lot of things with volunteers. When you're working with volunteers, and the board's still all volunteer, when you're working with volunteers, what you get in terms of a product depends on those individuals, their abilities, their knowledge, their experience, what they're able to and willing to provide. And so when you're leading that group, that kind of a group, you have to be able to cajole a little bit, but you also have to be willing to let them do what they want to do, because you can't really force anybody to do anything. And so you've got that situation all the time. But I thought that it was irresponsible to run this organization that way. It is just too big and too complex of an asset. You've got a 100-acre lake, you've got 20 common areas, you've got a 700-foot earthen dam, and to think that you're going to run all this with just people volunteering to do things, that's just bad management. But that's the way it was done for all those years, because the cheapest way was the best way. I came into it and thought, no, we need to invest in this because everybody's property value depends on that lake. So we need to invest in it and we need to professionalize this. And I think the first thing we did is we turned over financial management, or a lot of the financial management, to a professional outside company that handles the finances for, boy, I think it was close to 1,000 different subdivisions around the metropolitan area. So that all of that became much more professionalized, and we brought Carolyn in to take a lot of the load off of the board. As I said before, when I got on the board, they really expected board members to do everything from send out bills and collect assessments to go around cleaning up the common areas. And I think when you do that, you really limit the number of people who are willing to do it, who are willing to be on that board. And so, like I said, when I got on the board, it was like, hey, you do it. Because there wasn't any competition for seats on the board. You almost had to draft people to do it. You take them out of that role and you say to them, what I want is your knowledge, your experience, your intellect. I want you to help us figure out how to do things, not go out there and do them. And that's an important difference. And so now, in these days, you've got more candidates generally than you have seats. And I think that's a very healthy thing. I think the board is much stronger as I left it than when I first joined it, in terms of the types of people who are on there and what they bring to the table.
So the staff, can you kind of list the things that have changed as far as getting in professional staff? It's been Carolyn and...
Yeah, outsourcing the financial, most of the financial management. The association used to have people used to volunteer to cut the grass on the common areas. I think that's crazy. Not only can you not depend on that, okay, you're going, in fact, my understanding is somebody brought it up at the last annual meeting. You're going to depend on somebody. If I'd have been there, I'd have said, okay, let's see a raise of hands here. Who's going to volunteer to do this every week from the 1st of April to the end of October? You wouldn't have seen a whole lot of hands do that. The other thing with that is it's dangerous. It's potentially dangerous. Somebody could get hurt, or somebody out there could damage somebody's boat or something. If you've got a professional company that's dealing with it, you can first of all, if they're not doing a good job, you can call them up on the phone and raise hell with them. It's hard to do that when people are volunteering to do this work.
Sure.
So that's just another way. But we did a number of other things, I think, over the last 13 years to improve the association, make improvements to how we operated. And I made a list, but I don't remember them offhand. Well, we rewrote the covenants and restrictions. And that was important because the covenants and restrictions we had were ambiguous, they were hard to understand, there were parts of them that conflicted with other parts and so on, so we got those professionally done. In doing that, we didn't raise, but we changed the assessment structure. Assessment structure used to be this, and I guess it was right going back to day one, it was so many cents per square foot of land. And so, like you mentioned, somebody said it was about 150 bucks. Well, it was for some, but the range was, because it was land, it was anywhere from $80 to $1,100. And it didn't matter what you had on it. You could have a vacant lot and be paying $1,000 a month on it because of the size of the lot. And so I thought that was a very inequitable way to do
$1,000
it.
a year, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was very inequitable, and it was also, I mean, I ended up having a knockdown drag out with somebody over the size of their lot, and it ended up being over $1.50 a year. Why are we doing this? You know, so we made it a even $500. Because everybody, the way I look at it, that's like ante in poker. Okay, everybody benefits from this, like everybody has to put in money to make sure it can operate. And when we made it $500, probably should have made it more, but we were pressing our luck trying to get $500. And but by doing that, we increased the amount of money that we had, which meant that we could pay for the professional things. And it also did an important thing, and that is that it allowed us, it put us in a financial position to buy the Fogel property. One of the biggest mistakes that this association ever made, and this, the dam was built in 1939, the association was formed, the subdivision was platted in 1946. Over all those years, and they tell me that going back in the old years like that people thought Major Dunlap was nuts. Nobody's ever going to want to live this far out of town. And for many years, as I'm told, it was mostly undeveloped. And certainly everything around it was undeveloped. All those years, the association never went out and bought land. Well, and absolutely had to have that land, because a man-made lake like this fills up with sediment. It's a natural process. It's going to happen. It might happen faster, it might happen slower, depending on what's going on around you, but it's going to happen. And periodically, you're going to have to go out and you're going to have to dredge the lake and get that stuff out of there, or the lake will eventually fill in. And if you're going to do that, you have to have a place to put that stuff. We sat here all those years and let ourselves become entirely encapsulated by development. The property that's now Glick Park would have been fantastic if the association had bought that. A great place for depositing sediment because of its size. And if we had that, we could do it a whole lot cheaper than what we're talking about now. Because what we've got now, the Fogel property is only an open piece of ground left. If we had not gotten that, we'd just be screwed. There'd be no place to go with it. And so what do you do now? I don't know what you do now. So the Fogel property was absolutely essential to get that. And even today, people are saying we ought to sell it off. That would be disastrous.
So what are some of the changes you'd like to see made for the future, for the next president?
Well, let me see if I finished my list here. Yeah, I think we did. But the big thing I feel I left undone was actually getting a dredging program passed. We came close a couple of times, 61%. We needed we needed 67. But I just came to the belief, one, I was getting worn out. Two, we need more new people to understand what's going on and to convince the majority of the people around the lake that this is something